All right, U.S. history students, we are going to move on with our next set of notes. So we are going to pick up with the political side of the Progressive era. In 1901, Republican President William McKinley was assassinated, and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt is going to step into his shoes and become president. Theodore Roosevelt was a different kind of president because he thought government ought to take responsibility for the welfare of the people. He says it is the duty of the president to act upon the theory that he is the steward of the people and to assume that he has the legal right to do whatever the needs of the people demand, unless the Constitution or the laws explicitly forbid him to do it. So he's essentially expanding the office of the president in this statement. In 1902, Theodore Roosevelt, TR for short, negotiated a square deal between striking coal miners and their management. Throughout the Gilded Age, if you'll remember, laissez-faire policies by the national government had led to powerful monopolies and unfair working conditions for laborers. Congress had created the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1886 to help regulate railroads, and had passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890 to regulate companies that restrict trade. But neither was used to control monopolies during the Gilded Age. Roosevelt was the first president to regulate big business and break up corporate monopolies. He became known as a trust buster when he used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up the Northern Securities Company in 1902. Theodore Roosevelt busted 25 other corporate monopolies during his presidency, notably Rockefeller Standard Oil Company. But he saw the benefit of efficient monopolies, but wanted to control bad trusts. When Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle in 1906, President Roosevelt pressures Congress to create consumer safety laws. And Congress, as a result of The Jungle and pressure from Theodore Roosevelt, passes the Meat Inspection Act in 1906. They follow that with the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906 to ban harmful products and end false medical claims. During the Gilded Age, corporations also clear-cut forests and exploited America's abundant natural resources. And Theodore Roosevelt began the first national environmental conservation program. Under Theodore Roosevelt, the government will protect 195 million acres of land as national parks and forests. The Reclamation Service placed natural resources, oil, trees, and coal under federal protection. And so under Theodore Roosevelt, we see the development of our national park system and protection of lands like Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon. In 1908, Theodore Roosevelt decided to follow George Washington's precedent and not run for a third term, although he was popular. His presidency from 1901 to 1909 changes the United States. And for the first time, the government assumes responsibility for the welfare of all of its citizens, regulated big business, and protected the environment. His foreign policy also helps increase American influence in the world and led to the construction of the Panama Canal, and we're going to learn about his foreign policy in the next unit. When Theodore Roosevelt does not run for a third term in 1908, he helps William Howard Taft win the presidency to continue his progressive agenda that would protect all Americans. And like Theodore Roosevelt, Taft pushes for progressive reforms. As president, Taft broke up twice as many monopolies as Roosevelt. He helps establish the Children's Bureau, the Department of Labor, and child labor laws. And he helps create safety codes for coal miners and railroad workers. But Taft sometimes sided with the conservative wing of the Republican Party, and conservatives are a group of people who do not want change. And when he sides with some of the conservative members of the Republican Party, he angers progressive Republicans when he supports a high tariff, which will help large corporations. And Taft also allows 1 million acres of land that Roosevelt had set aside as conservation forest to be sold as businesses, so he kind of unprotects protected land. Theodore Roosevelt and progressive politicians were disappointed in Taft's performance. And so Theodore Roosevelt decided to run for president again in 1912, but the Republican Party decided not to pick Theodore Roosevelt as their candidate. They chose Taft as their candidate. So he formed a brand new political party called the Progressive Party, also known as the Bull Moose Party. And this comes from him saying, "I'm feeling fit as a bull moose." The election of 1912 was a three-way race. William Howard on the Republican ticket, Democrat Woodrow Wilson runs for the Democratic ticket, and then Theodore Roosevelt running as a progressive on the Bull Moose ticket. Republican voters were ultimately divided between Taft and Roosevelt, and this ends up in Democrat Woodrow Wilson winning the election in 1912. So basically, Republicans divided by a bull moose equals a Democratic victory. And you can see the Electoral College map heavily in favor of Wilson because of the split between the Republican Party. So you can see here the results of the split. Woodrow Wilson is going to oversee a lot of progressive reforms. Under his presidency, we're going to have the 16th Amendment, which creates the first national income tax, the 17th Amendment, which allows for the direct election of U.S. senators, the 18th Amendment, which outlaws alcohol. This period of time is also known as Prohibition, and the 19th Amendment, which grants women's suffrage or voting rights to women. Wilson regulated big business by pushing for the Clayton Antitrust Act that protected the workers' right to strike, and he created the Federal Trade Commission to monitor unfair business practices. Woodrow Wilson also creates the Federal Reserve System in 1913 to regulate the economy by adjusting the money supply and interest rates. The Fed, as it is commonly known, regulates the amount of money in circulation to help keep the economy strong. Financial panics in American history also are going to be a problem during this period and leading up to the Great Depression. The financial era, the progressive era of 1890 to 1920 brought many major changes to the United States. For the first time, the government began regulating big business. Working and living conditions improved. Women's suffrage and new state ballot reforms increased democracy for the people. But as we will learn in our next unit, America's involvement in World War II will bring an end to the progressive era.